Hey guys, tonight we are stepping back more than a century into a world that no longer knows peace. The air feels heavier here, filled with cold smoke, damp stone, and unspoken worry. It is the early 20th century, and the Great War has spread across continents, touching nearly every family, every street, every quiet corner of daily life. This is not a story of generals and grand strategies. It is the story of ordinary days lived in extraordinary times, of mornings that begin with uncertainty, of nights interrupted by distant thunder that may or may not be a storm. You're not on the battlefield tonight, yet the war is everywhere. It settles into kitchens, classrooms, factories and churches. It follows you to bed and greets you when you wake. As you listen, you will walk slowly through these years as an ordinary person might have done. You will notice the rhythm of life changing. You will feel the weight of absence, the strain of waiting, and the fragile comfort found in routine. You will discover how people continue to live, to love, to hope, even as the world around them seems to fracture. Let your mind drift gently as you imagine what your days would have been like during World War I, how you would have eaten, worked, prayed, worried, how you would have endured. And if this quiet journey through history brings you comfort, consider subscribing to the channel and activating the bell so you can return for many more nights of shared pasts. You're also warmly invited to leave a comment telling where you're listening from, and to gently like the video before sleep carries you away. Now breathe slowly. The war years are about to begin. You wake slowly, not to the sound of an alarm, but to the quiet murmur of a world already awake. The light that slips through the curtains feels pale, uncertain, filtered through smoke or mist, depending on the season. For a moment, as your eyes remain half closed, you almost forget. There is a fragile pause between sleep and memory, a breath where life feels almost normal. Then the war returns. It does not arrive loudly. It settles back into you gently, like a weight you have learned to carry. You remember where you are and when. You remember that this morning, like all the others, belongs to a world at war. You rise from your bed, which is often colder than you would like. Coal is precious now. Wood, too. Heat is something you think about constantly, measuring how much can be spared, how much must be saved for later. As you dress, you choose layers carefully, touching fabric that has been mended many times before. Clothes are no longer replaced easily. Every button matters. Every thread is reused. The room around you feels quieter than it once did. There are fewer voices in the house now. If you are old enough, you know why. If you're young, you feel the absence without fully understanding it. Beds that once belonged to sons, husbands, brothers or fathers now sit empty, sometimes carefully made, sometimes left untouched, as if disturbing them might invite a truth no one is ready to face. Outside, the day begins much like any other, yet never quite the same. You hear carts on cobblestones, factory whistles in the distance, the echo of boots on stone. These sounds have become the rhythm of wartime life. They are familiar, steady, almost comforting in their predictability. Routine is one of the few anchors you have left. As you step into the street, the air greets you with a mix of smells: damp earth, coal smoke, bread baking somewhere far away. The town looks unchanged at first glance. The buildings still stand, shops still open their doors, windows still reflect the morning light. And yet, when you look closer, you notice the differences everywhere. Posters cling to walls and fences, their colours faded by rain and time. They call for sacrifice, for courage, for patience. You have seen them so often that you barely read the words anymore, but their presence presses gently against your thoughts. They remind you that everything you do now serves something larger, something distant, something dangerous. Faces pass by you on the street. Many are familiar, many are not. You notice how people move more quickly, how conversations stay brief, how eyes linger just a little too long on uniforms. Soldiers on leave walk with a different posture, carrying the war in their shoulders even when they try to smile. You feel the unspoken questions that hang in the air. Where have you been? Where are you going back to? Will we see you again? Morning news travels fast, often before it is spoken. A glance, a pause, a hand placed gently on an arm. These small gestures carry meaning now. You've learned to read them. A neighbour's window remains closed longer than usual. Someone stands alone on a doorstep holding a letter. You do not ask questions unless invited. Silence has become a form of respect. Time itself feels different in this world. Days stretch long, filled with waiting. Nights arrive heavy, thick with thoughts you cannot easily quiet. You measure life in smaller units now. Meals prepared, tasks completed, letters received or not received. The future feels distant and fragile, while the present demands all your attention. As the morning unfolds, you take comfort in familiar actions. You sweep, you cook, you prepare for work, for school, for duties that must continue despite everything. These small routines give shape to your day. They remind you that you are still alive, still needed, still part of something that endures. And beneath it all, always beneath it, the war hums softly, like distant thunder, like a storm that never quite arrives, yet never truly leaves. You do not know what this day will bring. None of you ever do. But you step forward anyway, because that is what life requires now. Slowly, quietly, one morning at a time. As the morning continues, you begin to sense how deeply the war has reshaped even the smallest corners of your existence. Nothing is untouched. Even the way time moves feels altered, stretched thin, as if each hour carries more weight than it once did. You notice how carefully people handle objects now. Cups are placed gently on tables. Doors are closed softly. There is an unspoken understanding that noise feels sharper in a world already strained. Loud sounds startle more easily. A slammed door can make hearts jump, because somewhere, far away, or not so far, explosions still echo in memory. If you pass a school on your way, you hear children reciting lessons in voices that sound almost too serious for their age. Their words float through open windows, steady and rehearsed. Education continues, though it has changed. Geography lessons mention distant fronts. Arithmetic problems count supplies instead of apples. Even childhood bends slightly under the pressure of war. You feel it in yourself as well, this constant quiet vigilance. Your ears are always half-tuned for news. Your thoughts drift easily toward worry. Yet you have learned to live alongside this tension, to carry it without letting it consume every breath. There is a skill to surviving like this, one learned slowly, without anyone ever teaching it outright. As you move through your tasks, you may find yourself thinking of the day before, or the day before that. They blur together now, not because nothing happens, but because everything happens within narrow limits. The same streets, the same queues, the same faces marked by patience and fatigue. Change comes rarely, and when it does, it often arrives in the form of news you did not wish to receive. Some mornings the war announces itself more clearly. A train passes through town, carrying soldiers toward the front or wounded men away from it. You hear the hiss of steam, the metallic rhythm of wheels on rails. People pause just for a moment to watch. Hats are removed. Hands are raised in small gestures of farewell. Even those who have seen this countless times still stop to look. You cannot help but wonder who among them will return, and who will exist only in memory. The thought passes through you quietly, without drama, because dramatic thoughts are exhausting, and you must conserve your strength. There are rules now that did not exist before. Regulations posted in public spaces, instructions about lighting after dark, about what can be bought, what must be saved. You follow them not only out of obedience, but out of habit. They give structure to the chaos, a sense that someone, somewhere, is still attempting to impose order on the world. As the sun climbs higher, you may feel a brief warmth on your face. It is a simple sensation, almost forgotten in the long months of anxiety. You pause, even if only for a second, to let yourself feel it. These small physical comforts matter more than ever. Warmth, light, a moment of stillness. Conversations you overhear are restrained. People speak carefully, choosing words that do not invite fear too openly. There is an art to speaking around the war without naming it directly. Everyone understands what is being left unsaid. In this shared restraint, there is a strange form of solidarity. If you work, you turn your attention to what lies before you. The task itself may be mundane, repetitive, tiring, but work offers something precious: distraction. While your hands are busy, your mind can rest, if only slightly. Many people cling to this feeling, stretching their duties just enough to fill the day. And yet, even in concentration, thoughts wander. You think of those far away. You imagine them waking too, somewhere beyond the horizon, under a different sky. You wonder if they feel the same morning air, the same quiet dread softened by routine. These thoughts connect you invisibly across distance and danger. As midday approaches, the first half of the day draws to a close. You realize how much energy it has already taken simply to exist within it. War does not need constant violence to exhaust you. Its presence alone is enough. Still, you endure, you adjust, you live. This awakening, repeated day after day, becomes the foundation of wartime life. A slow opening of the eyes, a calm acceptance of uncertainty, a steady choice to step forward, even when the path ahead is hidden. And so, as this first day continues to unfold, you carry on, quietly, patiently, learning how to wake each morning in a world that has not yet remembered how to be at peace. You begin to notice, slowly, almost unwillingly, that childhood itself has changed shape in this world at war. It has not disappeared, but it has grown quieter, more careful, as if it knows it must take up less space. Children still wake in the morning, still rub sleep from their eyes, still feel hunger and curiosity, but all of it now unfolds beneath an invisible weight. In the early hours, you hear their footsteps on stone or packed earth as they make their way through streets that feel too serious for their small frames. Their clothes hang loosely, often altered and re-altered, passed down from older siblings, cousins, neighbours. Sleeves are rolled, shoes are patched. Nothing fits quite right, and yet no one complains. Children learn quickly that comfort is no longer guaranteed, and they accept this with a quiet adaptability that surprises you. Their faces seem older than they should be, not hardened, but watchful. You see it in their eyes when adults speak nearby. They pretend not to listen, yet absorb everything. Words like front, ration, missing, and telegram drift through rooms and settle into their understanding long before anyone explains them. They may not know exactly what these words mean, but they feel their gravity. On the way to school, children walk in small groups, instinctively staying close. Schools still operate because life must continue, because structure matters. Inside the classrooms, the air smells of chalk, damp coats and ink. Desks are worn smooth by generations of hands. Lessons are taught, but they feel different now. Geography lessons linger on maps marked with lines and arrows. Arithmetic problems quietly involve supplies, distances, quantities meant for armies rather than orchards. Teachers speak gently, yet firmly, their voices steady by necessity. Many are exhausted, some are grieving, others are filling roles they never expected to hold. The children sense this and respond with an unusual seriousness. They sit straighter, they speak less. They behave not because they're afraid, but because they feel the fragile balance holding everything together. During breaks, play still happens because it must. In courtyards and narrow streets, children invent games from what surrounds them. But the war slips into these games naturally, without instruction. Marching replaces chasing. Commands replace laughter. Sticks become rifles. You hear sharp, clipped words echoed imperfectly by young voices trying to imitate what they have overheard. There is no malice in it, only imitation, only familiarity. Some children refuse these games entirely. They sit apart, drawing in the dirt, whispering stories, clutching small objects brought from home. A button, a smooth stone, a folded scrap of paper. These small possessions take on immense importance, grounding them in something personal and safe. At home, childhood blends into responsibility. Many children return from school not to play, but to help. They fetch water, watch younger siblings, peel vegetables, carry messages. These tasks are not framed as burdens. They are simply necessary. You see how carefully children perform them, how proud they are to be useful. In a world stripped of certainty, usefulness becomes a form of security. Meals are quieter than they once were. Children eat what they are given without question, learning the rhythms of scarcity. They learn which foods are rare, which are substitutes, which are saved for special days. Hunger is not always sharp, but it is constant, a background presence that teaches patience more effectively than any lesson. In the evenings, children hover near adults, sensing when comfort is needed and when space must be given. They learn when to ask questions and when to remain silent. They learn that some evenings are heavy, that some letters change the atmosphere of a room without being read aloud. They may not understand the words, but they understand the pauses. Before sleep, children are tucked into beds that feel too large or too small, under blankets worn thin. You hear whispered prayers, not always taught, sometimes invented, simple wishes, simple hopes, that someone will come home, that tomorrow will be easier, that the night will pass quietly. As their breathing slows, you sense how deeply this world is shaping them. These children are learning resilience not through speeches, but through repetition, through watching, through adapting, through surviving each ordinary day beneath the distant, ever-present shadow of cannons. And as you watch them sleep, You understand that the war is not only being fought far away, it is being absorbed here, quietly, into the earliest memories of a generation that will never fully remember a world without it. As the days accumulate one after another, you begin to sense how this altered childhood settles deep into the bones, becoming something steady, almost normal. What once would have felt unbearable slowly turns into routine. Children adapt because adaptation is their quiet strength, and because no one tells them they're allowed not to. You notice how their conversations change. They speak less about the future and more about the immediate day ahead. Tomorrow is close enough to imagine. Next year feels vague, distant, unreal. When they do speak of the future, it is often framed around return rather than possibility. When someone comes back, when the war ends, when things are as they were before, though many of them are too young to truly remember what that means. At school, absences become familiar. A child disappears from a desk one morning, and no explanation is given. You sense the unasked questions ripple through the room. Children learn not to press for answers. They understand intuitively that some things are private, that grief moves quietly and deserves space. A new child may arrive days later, displaced from another town, carrying a small bag and a heavy silence. These newcomers are watched carefully, not with cruelty, but with curiosity mixed with caution. Children know what it means to lose familiarity. They make room slowly, offering gestures instead of words, a shared pencil, a place on a bench. Acceptance grows gently, without ceremony. Illness passes through classrooms and homes more easily now. Bodies are tired. Nutrition is inconsistent. Winters feel harsher. You see children coughing, wrapped in scarves that once belonged to adults. Care is given, but resources are limited. Recovery is not always quick. Sometimes it does not come at all. Children attend funerals dressed in dark clothing that feels too heavy for them, standing quietly beside adults whose faces have grown unreadable. Death becomes something they sense rather than understand. It enters their world not as a single event but as a presence. It is in the way conversations stop when they enter a room, in the way certain names are no longer spoken, in the way chairs remain empty. They do not always cry, but they remember. Holidays arrive carefully. Birthdays are marked with small gestures, a slice of bread saved, a handwritten card, a moment of attention. Celebrations are subdued, but intentional. Adults understand how important it is to preserve these moments, to protect some sense of continuity for the young. Candles are lit, then quickly extinguished. Songs are sung softly, as if volume itself might be dangerous. Some children are sent away, evacuated to countryside villages or distant relatives. You watch them board trains, holding hands tightly, carrying labels with their names written carefully. They try to be brave. They are told they're lucky. But as the train pulls away, their faces pressed to the glass, eyes searching for the last familiar shape. Separation leaves a mark that lingers long after safety is reached. Those who remain learn the geography of fear. They know which streets feel safer, which buildings echo too loudly, which sounds signal danger, and which can be ignored. They learn to pause when sirens sound, to wait for instruction, to follow adults without question. These behaviors become automatic, learned through repetition rather than explanation. Yet amid all of this, life insists on inserting moments of light. Children still laugh, sudden, unrestrained laughter that surprises everyone, including themselves. They still chase each other when they forget to be careful. They still dream, even if those dreams are harder to describe. In these moments, you see the war loosen its grip just slightly. At night, as children settle into sleep, their dreams carry fragments of the day. Trains, voices, familiar faces, sometimes fear, sometimes comfort. Sleep becomes a refuge, a place where rules and shortages fade. For a few hours, they're simply children again. Watching this, you understand that the war is shaping something deep and lasting. These children will grow into adults who know how to endure uncertainty, who understand loss without needing it explained. Their memories will not be of battles, but of waiting rooms, kitchens, classrooms, and quiet nights filled with listening. Childhood, here, does not end abruptly. It thins, it stretches, it becomes something quieter and more fragile, yet also more resilient than anyone could have imagined. And as another day closes, you sense that these children carry forward something precious, not innocence untouched, but strength learned gently in the shadow of cannons, one ordinary, extraordinary day at a time. As you move deeper into daily life during these war years, you start to feel how profoundly homes themselves have changed. Not in their walls or roofs, but in their atmosphere. Houses still stand along the same streets, their doors opening each morning as they always have, yet something essential has shifted inside them. An absence settles into rooms, quiet but persistent, like a draught that never quite disappears. You step into a home and immediately sense it. There are fewer voices now, fewer footsteps echoing down hallways. Chairs sit empty at tables, sometimes pushed slightly back, as if waiting. Personal objects remain where they were left. A coat still hanging by the door, boots carefully cleaned and stored, a pipe resting untouched on a shelf. These items are not moved. They feel like anchors, holding space for someone who is not there. Women move through these homes with measured purpose. Their days are fuller now, heavier with responsibility. Tasks once shared are now carried alone. You watch them rise early, tend fires, prepare food, manage children, keep accounts, repair what breaks. There is little time for rest. Fatigue settles into their movements, yet they continue, because stopping is not an option. The rhythm of domestic life has slowed in some ways, intensified in others. Meals take longer to prepare with fewer ingredients. Cleaning is done carefully, conserving water and soap. Even light is rationed. In the evenings, lamps burn low, casting long shadows on walls that seem to listen as much as they illuminate. Outside, the streets tell the same story. You walk along familiar paths and notice how the crowd has changed shape. There are more women now, more elderly men, more children. The soundscape is different. Fewer deep voices, fewer bursts of loud laughter. Conversations are quieter, more restrained, as if volume itself must be conserved. You notice how people greet one another. There's warmth, but also caution. A shared glance carries understanding. A nod replaces words. Everyone knows that behind each face lies a private burden. Asking too much risks opening wounds that cannot easily be closed. Shops remain open, though many shelves are bare. Shopkeepers stand patiently behind counters, repeating the same explanations day after day. No, that item is not available. No, they do not know when it will be again. Customers accept this with practiced resignation. Complaints are rare. Everyone understands scarcity now, not as an inconvenience, but as a condition of life. Windows display posters and notices where advertisements once hung, instructions, appeals, announcements of loss. You slow your pace as you pass them, reading names, dates, places. Some names you recognize, others you do not, yet they all weigh on you the same. Each represents a life interrupted, a home changed forever. As you continue down the street, you see how buildings themselves seem to absorb the war. Factories run longer hours, their windows glowing late into the night. Churches open their doors more often, offering quiet spaces for reflection and prayer. Public buildings host meetings, distributions, announcements. Every structure finds a new role, adapting just as people do. In the absence of men, communities reorganize themselves quietly. Neighbors help one another more readily. Older children run errands for those who cannot. Women exchange skills, advice, support. There is a sense of collective endurance, unspoken but strong. Survival becomes a shared effort. Yet despite this cooperation, loneliness lingers. Even surrounded by others, you feel it. In the evenings, when streets empty and doors close, silence grows heavier. You hear clocks ticking, floors creaking, wind pressing against windows. These sounds, once comforting, now amplify the sense of waiting. Photographs become precious. You see them placed carefully on mantels and bedside tables. Faces stare out from frames, frozen in time, smiling, unaware of what lies ahead. You pause before them often, memorizing details, as if repetition might keep the person alive in memory. Letters are read and reread within these homes. Ink fades, paper softens, words are learned by heart. Some letters bring relief, others confusion, others dread. And sometimes there are no letters at all. The waiting stretches on, filling rooms with unanswered questions. As night falls, homes grow quieter still. Curtains are drawn, lights dim. Families gather close, not always speaking, simply sharing space. In these moments, the absence feels sharpest. Yet there is also strength here, in togetherness, in endurance, in the simple act of remaining. You understand now that the war does not only empty battlefields, it empties homes, it reshapes streets, it leaves behind spaces filled not with noise, but with memory, responsibility, and quiet resolve. And as you walk these streets, past these homes, you feel how deeply this absence has become part of everyday life. A presence defined not by what is seen, but by what is missing. After living there, you know that absence is not a single moment, but a condition that settles in and stays. It becomes part of the architecture of daily life, shaping habits, gestures, even thoughts. You no longer react to it sharply each day. Instead, you live alongside it, adjusting yourself around its edges. Inside homes, routines evolve to accommodate what is no longer there. Chairs are moved closer to the fire so warmth can be shared. Rooms once reserved for specific purposes are repurposed. A study becomes a bedroom. A dining room becomes a workspace. Nothing remains fixed for long. Flexibility becomes a survival skill. You notice how evenings stretch differently now. Without the familiar return of footsteps at the door, time seems to slow. Meals are eaten earlier or later depending on work and energy. Conversations drift, often circling the same topics without ever landing. Silence fills the spaces between sentences, not awkwardly, but patiently. Women sit together mending clothes long into the night, their hands moving almost automatically. Needles pass through fabric with practiced precision. This repetitive motion offers comfort. It gives the mind something steady to hold on to. Stories are shared quietly, memories from before the war, updates from neighbours, small observations about the day. Laughter appears briefly, then fades, leaving behind a warmth that lingers. Children sense the weight of these evenings. They grow quieter, staying close, absorbing the atmosphere. Bedtime routines stretch as adults linger beside them, reluctant to leave rooms empty. Stories are read slowly, sometimes repeated night after night. Familiar words offer reassurance in a world where so much feels uncertain. Beyond individual homes, entire streets seem to hold their breath. You walk them at dusk and feel how differently sound travels now. Footsteps echo more clearly. Voices carry farther. Every noise feels amplified against the quiet. Lamps glow behind curtains, each one a small island of light against the darkness. Public spaces take on new meanings. Town squares host announcements and gatherings meant to inform, reassure, organise. People stand together, coats pulled tight, listening closely. News is delivered carefully, often without detail. You watch faces as words are spoken, seeing relief ripple through some, dread through others. Reactions are contained. Displays of emotion are private now. The absence of men reshapes labour as well. Tasks once divided are redistributed. Women take on work previously closed to them, learning quickly, adapting out of necessity. You see determination in their posture, pride mixed with exhaustion. Elderly men step forward where they can, offering knowledge, guidance, presence. Everyone contributes in whatever way remains possible. Despite this shared effort, moments of fragility surface unexpectedly. A door left open too long, a cup set down in the wrong place, a song drifting from a window. These small things can unravel composure in an instant. Tears come suddenly, then are wiped away just as quickly. There is no time for collapse. Life presses on. You notice how memory becomes both comfort and burden. People speak of the past more often now, recalling ordinary moments with unusual tenderness. A walk taken together, a meal shared, a laugh remembered. These memories are revisited not out of nostalgia alone, but out of need. They reaffirm that joy once existed and therefore might exist again. Yet the future remains difficult to imagine. Plans are short-term, cautious. Few speak of years ahead. Instead, attention stays anchored to days, sometimes only to hours. This narrowing of focus helps manage the weight of uncertainty. It makes survival feel achievable. At night, as streets empty and homes settle into stillness, thoughts grow louder. You lie awake listening to distant sounds, a train, a dog barking, wind through bare branches. Each sound invites speculation. Each pause invites worry. Sleep comes unevenly, interrupted by dreams filled with familiar faces and unanswered questions. And still morning returns. Curtains are opened, fires are lit. Streets fill once more with purposeful movement. The quiet absence remains, but it no longer paralyzes. It has been woven into the fabric of daily existence. You realize that this is how people endure, not by defeating absence, but by learning to live alongside it, by reshaping homes, redefining streets, and carrying forward with quiet determination. The war may have taken bodies from these places, but it has not erased life from them. It has transformed it, slower, heavier, more deliberate, yet still moving forward, one careful day after another. And as you continue walking these streets, passing these homes, You feel the resilience that grows in the spaces left behind. A resilience built not on noise or heroics, but on patience, responsibility, and the steady courage of simply continuing to live. Food is no longer a simple pleasure or a routine necessity. It becomes a daily concern, a calculation, a quiet source of anxiety that follows you from morning to night. Hunger does not always announce itself loudly. Often it settles in gently, a dull presence that you learn to live with. Your days begin with thoughts of meals, not what you desire but what might be possible. You open cupboards slowly, already knowing what you will find. Shelves look barer than they once did. Ingredients are fewer. Choices are limited. Yet you move with care, because every crumb matters now. Breakfast is modest. Bread, if there is any, is thinly sliced. Spreads are scarce, used sparingly. You chew slowly, not only to savour the taste, but to make the moment last. Hot drinks are weaker, sometimes only warm water flavoured faintly with something remembered rather than truly present. Still, the ritual of eating brings comfort. It marks the beginning of the day. It gives structure. Outside, queues begin to form early. You join them instinctively, carrying baskets, bags, ration cards folded carefully in pockets. People line up quietly, coats pulled tight, breath visible in colder months. Conversations are muted. Everyone understands the rules of waiting. You stand where you are placed. You move forward when the line moves. You hope supplies will last until your turn comes. Time stretches while you wait. Minutes feel longer here, measured not by clocks but by footsteps and murmurs. You listen to the sounds around you, shuffling shoes, baskets brushing against coats, the occasional sigh. You watch the faces ahead of you, trying not to count how many remain between you and the counter. Shop windows display little. What they lack in abundance they make up for in signs. Notices list what is unavailable, what may arrive later, what requires special permission. You read them repeatedly, even though the words rarely change. Hope clings stubbornly to routine. When at last you reach the front, exchanges are brief. The shopkeeper weighs portions carefully, eyes attentive, movements precise. There is no room for generosity beyond what regulations allow. Everyone knows this. Gratitude is expressed quietly, sometimes only with a nod. What you receive is wrapped carefully, as if presentation itself adds value. You carry your provisions home with a sense of both relief and calculation. How long will this last? How should it be divided? Which meals can be stretched? Which must remain simple? These decisions become second nature, woven into daily thought. At home, cooking is an act of invention. Recipes adapt constantly. Ingredients substitute for one another in creative ways. You learn to make do, to transform the ordinary into something sustaining. Soups become thinner, then thicker again, depending on availability. Stews simmer longer to draw out every bit of flavour. Waste is unthinkable. The smell of food fills rooms more fully now, because it is rarer. Even simple dishes feel significant. You notice how people gather closer when meals are prepared, drawn by scent and anticipation. Eating becomes a shared experience, quieter, more deliberate. Children learn quickly to accept smaller portions. They ask fewer questions. They understand, without being told, that scarcity is part of life now. Treats become rare and precious. When they appear, they are remembered long after. Hunger shows itself in subtle ways, in tired eyes, in slower movements. in moments of irritability quickly suppressed. You feel it in yourself, a low ache that comes and goes, reminding you of what once was plentiful. You learn to ignore it when necessary, to focus on tasks, to drink water to quiet it. Markets, once lively and abundant, feel restrained. Stalls are fewer, produce is limited, prices fluctuate unpredictably. You move through them carefully, comparing, calculating, deciding. Every purchase feels important, weighted with consequence. Yet amid all this, there is solidarity. People share tips quietly. They exchange information about deliveries, substitutes, small advantages. They help one another carry bags. There is a sense that everyone is navigating the same uncertainty. As evening approaches, the thought of the next meal already forms in your mind, not with dread, but with planning. Food has become a rhythm, a series of small victories and careful compromises. And as you sit down to eat once more, you realize that hunger, though present, has not defeated you. It has reshaped you, teaching patience, creativity, restraint, teaching you how to endure. This is how the war enters the body, not only through fear or loss, but through the quiet, persistent negotiation between need and availability, through meals that sustain not just the body, but the will to continue. And tomorrow you will queue again. As days turn into weeks, and weeks stretch quietly into months, you notice how deeply the search for food organizes your entire existence. Meals no longer punctuate the day casually, they define it. Everything else arranges itself around them: work, rest, even conversation. Hunger becomes a background rhythm, steady and persistent, like the ticking of a clock you cannot silence. You learn to recognize the different kind of hunger. There is the sharp hunger of an empty stomach, uncomfortable but familiar. And there is another, more subtle kind, the hunger for variety, for abundance, for the flavors that once marked seasons and celebrations. This second hunger lingers longer. It is fed by memory as much as by need. You remember meals from before the war more vividly now. Bread that was thick and warm, butter spread without counting, fruit eaten without hesitation. These memories surface unexpectedly, sometimes triggered by a smell, sometimes by a word. They bring comfort and sadness in equal measure. You learn not to dwell on them too long. Ration cards become essential objects, handled carefully, stored safely. You check them often, fingers tracing the printed lines, counting what remains. Losing them would be unthinkable. Without them, food is unreachable. They represent both security and limitation, permission and restriction bound together. At home, cupboards are arranged meticulously. You know exactly what is left and where it sits. Jars are labelled, scraps are saved, bones are boiled more than once, peels are repurposed, even crumbs are collected carefully, pressed into something usable. Nothing is truly finished until it has been used to its absolute limit. Cooking becomes quieter, slower, more thoughtful. You stir pots patiently, letting time do the work that abundance once did. You rely on heat, on repetition, on care. The kitchen fills with steam and familiar smells, not luxurious, but reassuring. This space becomes a place of control in a world where so much feels uncontrollable. When meals are served, portions are measured with care. No one reaches for seconds unless invited. Eating is deliberate. You chew slowly, aware of each bite. Conversation during meals softens. There is a reverence now, not spoken aloud, but felt. Food is respected because it is earned. Children adapt in their own way. They learn which questions not to ask. They learn that hunger passes, that patience is rewarded. Occasionally they forget, and disappointment flickers across their faces. Adults notice and feel it sharply, yet offer reassurance in gentle tones. Comfort replaces explanation. There are days when supplies do not arrive as expected. You sense the tension ripple through cues before words are spoken. People glance at one another, calculating silently. When shelves empty too soon, resignation settles in quickly. There is frustration, yes, but also understanding. Anger feels wasted when it cannot change the outcome. In these moments, community matters. Neighbours share when they can, quietly, without ceremony. A cup of flour, a handful of vegetables, a suggestion whispered at the door. These small acts carry immense weight. They remind you that survival is collective, not individual. Hunger affects the body slowly. You notice how clothes fit more loosely, how energy dips unexpectedly, how cold feels sharper, illness lingers longer, yet you also notice resilience. Bodies adjust. People learn to pace themselves, to rest when possible, to conserve effort as carefully as they conserve food. Markets and shops become places of both hope and disappointment. You visit them regularly, even when you expect little. The act itself feels necessary, almost ritualistic. You walk the familiar paths, greet familiar faces, exchange brief updates. Being there connects you to the wider rhythm of the community. Occasionally there are surprises. A shipment arrives unexpectedly. A rare item appears briefly. Excitement moves through the crowd, restrained but unmistakable. You feel it in quickened steps, in eyes brightening for just a moment. These small victories are remembered long after they pass. As night approaches, hunger often grows louder. You feel it more clearly when tasks slow and silence settles. You distract yourself with routine, tidying, mending, preparing for the next day. Eventually sleep softens the ache, carrying you into a world where abundance sometimes returns, fleeting and unreal. And yet when morning comes, you rise again. You plan, you queue, you cook, you eat, you endure. Food, once simple, has become a lesson in patience, humility, and solidarity. Hunger teaches you what truly matters. It strips life down to essentials and asks whether you can still continue. And day after day, you answer quietly, without speeches or pride, yes, you can. And so the queues will form again tomorrow, stretching patiently along familiar streets, carrying with them the quiet determination of people who have learned how to survive with less, together. As the war settles into its long grinding rhythm, work has become something very different from what it once was. It is no longer simply a way to earn a living or structure the day. It has become a duty, a contribution, a quiet form of participation in a conflict that reaches far beyond your immediate surroundings. Even if you never see the front, you feel that every task now carries weight. You wake early, often before the light has fully entered the room. Sleep is lighter these days, interrupted by worry, by cold, by habit. Your body rises almost automatically, already preparing for the effort ahead. There is little indulgence in lingering. Work waits, and work feels urgent, even when it is repetitive or exhausting. If you pass factories on your way, you notice how alive they feel now. Smoke rises steadily from chimneys. Windows glow before sunrise. The air vibrates with sound, metal striking metal, engines humming, whistles signalling shifts. These places no longer rest as they once did. Production runs longer, harder, faster. Time itself seems stretched inside these walls. You see many new faces entering these spaces. Women, older men, sometimes even adolescents move through factory gates with determined expressions. Clothing is practical, often worn thin. Hair is tied back, sleeves rolled up. There is little ceremony. People step into roles they never expected to hold, learning as they go, guided by necessity rather than preparation. Inside, the work is demanding. Machines roar, heat builds, and the pace rarely slows. You feel vibration through the floor, through your hands, through your bones. Tasks are precise and repetitive, requiring focus even when fatigue creeps in. Mistakes carry consequences. There is pressure to perform, to keep pace, to contribute fully. Yet there is also a strange sense of pride that grows quietly. You know that what you're producing matters. Ammunition, uniforms, equipment, supplies, all of it will travel far beyond this place. You imagine hands receiving it somewhere else, relying on its quality, its reliability. This thought steadies you when exhaustion threatens to overwhelm. For those who do not work in factories, labour still changes shape. Farms demand more effort with fewer hands. Fields attended by women, children, the elderly. You see them working slowly but steadily, adjusting techniques, sharing tools, helping one another lift and carry. The land does not pause for war. Crops must still be planted, harvested, preserved. Domestic work expands as well. Homes become centres of production in their own way. Clothes are sewn, repaired, altered endlessly. Soap is made carefully. Food is preserved whenever possible. Nothing is wasted. Every task is approached with intention, because resources are limited and mistakes are costly. You notice how work fills conversations now. People exchange information about shifts, shortages, injuries, changes in regulations. There is less talk of ambition, more talk of endurance. The goal is not advancement, but continuation, to keep going, to last. Fatigue settles deeply into bodies. Muscles ache, hands roughen, eyes strain under poor light. Rest is scarce, yet valued. You learn to take it where you can. A moment leaning against a wall, a brief pause during a shift change, a few minutes of stillness before sleep. These small rests become essential. Despite exhaustion, attendance remains high. Absence is noticed immediately. Everyone understands that each missing body increases the burden on others. Guilt accompanies illness. People push themselves beyond comfort, beyond health, because the alternative feels worse. There is also danger in this work. Accidents happen, machines fail, fatigue leads to mistakes. When someone is injured, work pauses briefly, then resumes. There is sympathy, concern, quiet fear, but also inevitability. Risk has become part of daily calculation. As the day progresses, you feel time blur. Hours pass, measured by tasks rather than clocks. You focus on the immediate, the movement of hands, the rhythm of machines, the repetition that allows thought to drift. In this focused state, worry recedes slightly. Work becomes a form of refuge. When shifts end, bodies spill back into streets, moving more slowly now. Faces are smudged with soot or dust. Shoulders sag. Yet there is a shared understanding among those walking together. You have all given what you could today. That knowledge carries you forward. At home, work does not fully stop. There are still meals to prepare, chores to complete, plans to make for the next day. You move through these tasks with practiced efficiency, conserving energy, prioritizing what must be done. As night falls, you feel the weight of labour settle into you. It is heavy, but also grounding. In a world defined by uncertainty, work offers something solid, something measurable, something that connects you to others doing the same day after day. This is how the home front holds, through effort repeated quietly, through bodies pushed to their limits, through work that asks much and gives back only the knowledge that you are contributing, that you are needed, that you are part of something larger than yourself, and tomorrow you will rise and do it again. As the weeks accumulate and the seasons shift, work seeps into every corner of life, dissolving the boundaries that once separated labour from rest. The idea of a clear beginning and end to the working day fades. Instead, effort stretches outward, filling mornings, evenings, and even the quiet spaces of thought. You notice how the body adapts reluctantly at first, then almost automatically. Muscles harden, movements become economical. You learn how to lift without wasting strength, how to stand without locking your knees, how to breathe in rhythm with effort. Pain becomes familiar, a dull companion rather than a warning. You acknowledge it briefly, then move past it, because there is always more to be done. In factories, shifts overlap, one group flowing into the next like a tide that never fully retreats. You watch workers pass each other at the gates, exchanging brief looks that say everything and nothing. One group arrives with resolve, the other leaves with exhaustion etched into their posture. The air outside smells of oil, smoke, and hot metal, clinging to clothes long after work has ended. Inside these places, time loses its softness. Bells and whistles dictate movement. Breaks are short, carefully timed. You eat quickly, standing or sitting wherever space allows. Food tastes of haste. Conversations are fragments, interrupted by noise and duty. Yet even here, small bonds form. Shared glances, a nod of encouragement, a hand steadying another when fatigue threatens balance. On farms, work follows a different rhythm, but it is no less demanding. You rise with the sun and labour until it sinks again. Fields stretch endlessly, indifferent to war. Weather becomes a constant concern. Rain delays planting. Frost threatens crops. You work around these forces with patience and ingenuity, aware that failure here means hunger later. Children help more now, learning tasks earlier than generations before them. You see them carrying tools too large for their hands, moving carefully, concentrating fiercely. Adults guide them gently, correcting without discouraging. There is pride in these moments, mixed with sadness that such responsibility has arrived so soon. In towns, workshops hum with activity. Tailors stitch uniforms instead of fine garments. Cobblers repair boots destined for mud and cold. Blacksmiths and carpenters adjust their craft to new demands. Traditional skills find new purpose, reshaped by necessity. Women balance multiple roles with quiet determination. They work long hours outside the home, then return to manage households, care for children, tend the sick, write letters. Fatigue accumulates, but complaint feels indulgent. You see resilience in the way they move, efficient and focused, conserving energy wherever possible. There are moments when the strain shows openly. Tempers flare briefly, then are checked. Tears appear unexpectedly, wiped away quickly. Laughter sometimes breaks out inappropriately, a release rather than joy. These reactions pass through workspaces like brief weather, acknowledged but not discussed. Regulations and expectations continue to evolve. New quotas are announced, new procedures introduced. You adapt again, absorbing changes without protest, because adaptation has become second nature. Resistance feels futile. Cooperation feels necessary. Work injuries leave visible marks, bandaged hands, limps, scars. Some return quickly, others do not return at all. Their absence is felt immediately, their tasks redistributed without ceremony. There is sympathy, but also urgency. Production cannot pause for grief. Yet despite the relentless pace, moments of meaning surface. You overhear news of a shipment completed on time, of supplies reaching where they are needed. Pride moves quietly through the workforce, not loud or celebratory, but steady. It reinforces the belief that effort here matters, that it reaches beyond these walls and fields. As evening approaches, exhaustion settles deeply. You move more slowly now, conserving what remains. The journey home feels longer. Streets blur slightly. Sounds soften. When you finally step inside, the stillness feels profound. You remove work-worn clothes carefully, as if handling something fragile. Rest comes unevenly. Sleep is deep but often interrupted, filled with dreams of repetition and motion. Machines, fields, endless tasks. You wake already tired, yet ready, because readiness has become habit. And still, beneath the weariness there is resolve. Work on the home front has become a quiet promise that you will continue, that you will contribute, that you will hold your place in a vast, unseen network of effort. This labour may never be celebrated, it may leave no monuments, but it sustains everything else. It feeds armies, clothes them, equips them, supports those waiting at home. It holds society together when so much threatens to pull it apart. So you rise again, you work again, you endure again. Because in this world at war, work is not just what you do, it is how you survive. War drags on. A quiet shift is taking place inside people. A turning inward. A searching for meaning that words alone can no longer provide. Faith, belief, and superstition begin to weave themselves more tightly into daily life. Not always loudly, not always openly, but persistently, like a low flame kept alive against the dark. You feel it first in the rhythm of days. Bells ring more often now, not only to mark hours, but to gather people together. Churches, chapels, synagogues, and quiet meeting rooms fill with bodies seeking stillness. You step inside and are met by a different kind of air, cooler, hushed, carrying the scent of wax, wood, and old stone. The outside world fades slightly here, softened by walls built for contemplation. People sit close together, coats brushing, shoulders touching. Some bow their heads, others stare forward, eyes unfocused, lips move silently. Prayers are spoken aloud, but many remain unvoiced. Words feel inadequate for the scale of fear and hope carried inside. Silence becomes its own language. You notice how prayers have changed. They are no longer abstract or distant. They are specific for this name, for that place, for a letter to arrive, for a knock not to come. Faith narrows itself to immediate needs, stripped of ornament. There is less asking for victory, more asking for survival. Even those who once dismissed belief find themselves drawn into these spaces, not necessarily out of conviction, but out of need. Ritual offers structure where life feels shapeless. Repetition offers comfort where certainty has vanished. Lighting a candle, bowing the head, murmuring familiar words. These actions steady the hands, slow the breath. Outside formal religion, superstition grows quietly. You see it in small gestures repeated unconsciously, a charm carried in a pocket, a phrase spoken before sleep, a routine followed precisely as if deviation might invite disaster. People touch wood, avoid certain days, interpret dreams with new seriousness. You begin to notice how these beliefs pass between people almost invisibly. A neighbour mentions something that worked for them. A relative repeats an old saying. These fragments of folklore spread not because they are proven, but because they offer something precious. The illusion of control in a world where control feels lost. At home, small altars appear on shelves and windowsills. Photographs placed beside candles, religious symbols hung carefully, flowers arranged when available. These spaces become focal points for thought and emotion. You pause before them often, sometimes without realizing it, grounding yourself in the act of remembrance or hope. Children absorb these practices easily. They learn prayers by sound before understanding their meaning. They imitate gestures, light candles under supervision, whisper wishes before sleep. Belief becomes woven into their routine, not as doctrine, but as comfort. Even superstition takes root early, learned through observation rather than instruction. Illness and injury deepen this reliance on faith. When medicine feels limited, when outcomes feel uncertain, prayer fills the gap. You sit beside beds, holding hands, listening to breathing, repeating words softly. Sometimes these moments bring peace. Sometimes they bring nothing at all. Yet you continue, because doing something feels better than doing nothing. Clergy members move quietly through communities, offering presence rather than answers. You see them listening more than speaking, understanding that explanations cannot soothe every wound. Their role shifts from guidance to accompaniment, walking alongside grief without attempting to resolve it. Funerals grow more frequent, and with them, ritual becomes essential. Familiar words spoken over unfamiliar losses help frame what feels otherwise unmanageable. You stand among others, heads bowed, feeling both alone and connected. Shared mourning becomes a form of solidarity. At night, belief often feels strongest. Darkness amplifies uncertainty. Thoughts wander toward worst possibilities. You lie awake, listening to distant sounds, pressing hands together instinctively. Prayers come unbidden, sometimes fragmented, sometimes repetitive. They're not always hopeful. Sometimes they're simply pleas for the night to pass quietly. You begin to understand that faith during war is not about certainty. It is about endurance. It does not erase fear. It sits beside it. It offers a place to set down worry, if only briefly, before picking it up again. As days continue, belief becomes less about doctrine and more about survival. It adapts, bends, reshapes itself around the lived experience. It becomes personal, intimate, woven into daily gestures rather than grand declarations. And as you move through this world shaped by war, you feel how these silent prayers, whispered hopes, and small superstitions form an invisible network, connecting people across homes, across streets, across distances. They do not stop the war, but they help people endure it. As time passes, you begin to realize that belief during the war is not something fixed or clearly defined. It shifts gently from day to day, shaped by exhaustion, by hope, by disappointment. It is less a system of answers than a way of breathing through uncertainty. You feel it settling into habits so deeply that you sometimes forget it is there at all. You notice how mornings often begin with a small, almost unconscious gesture, a pause before rising, a hand resting briefly on the chest, a word murmured too quietly to hear. These moments are not dramatic. They are practical. They mark the beginning of another day survived, another set of risks accepted. In public spaces, belief remains restrained. You see people remove hats when passing places of worship, even if they do not enter. You notice how conversations soften when religious topics arise, how disagreements fade quickly. This is not a time for argument. Certainty feels fragile, and no one wishes to shatter what little comfort remains. Superstition weaves itself deeper into routine. You catch yourself noticing patterns where none may exist. A letter arrives on a certain day, and that day gains significance. A bad piece of news follows a particular action, and that action is quietly avoided thereafter. You do not question these connections too closely. Questioning would require energy better spent elsewhere. Some people develop elaborate private rituals. You know of someone who lights a candle at the same hour every evening, regardless of circumstances. Another who walks the same route each day, refusing to vary it. These habits create the illusion of influence, a sense that personal actions still matter in a world governed by forces far beyond reach. Stories circulate quietly, tales of premonitions, of dreams that predicted loss or survival. You listen without judgment. In times like these, stories serve a purpose beyond truth or falsehood. They provide meaning. They suggest that events are not entirely random, that there is some pattern beneath the chaos, even if it cannot be fully understood. Faith also becomes entwined with guilt. You see it in the eyes of those whose loved ones have returned while others have not. Gratitude mixes with unease. People ask themselves why they were spared. They search for reasons, explanations, signs. Belief becomes a way to reconcile survival with loss, even when no satisfying answer emerges. For those who receive bad news, faith often shifts suddenly. Some cling to it more tightly, pressing against ritual as if against a lifeline. Others retreat from it, wounded by unanswered prayers. Both responses are met with quiet acceptance. No one judges. Everyone understands that belief reacts differently to pain. In moments of collective crisis, communities turn inward together. You see people gather spontaneously after troubling announcements, standing close, speaking softly. Someone suggests a prayer, someone else offers silence instead. Both are accepted. These shared pauses feel important, anchoring people who might otherwise drift into despair. Music becomes a form of belief as well. Hymns, songs, familiar melodies rise softly in gatherings, in homes, sometimes even in workplaces. Voices blend gently, imperfectly. Singing steadies breathing. It reminds people that they are not alone. Words carried by melody feel lighter, easier to hold. Children continue to absorb all of this without commentary. They learn which objects are treated with care, which words are spoken reverently, which moments demand quiet. Belief becomes part of the atmosphere around them. They may not name it, but they feel its presence shaping behavior, offering reassurance. As loss accumulates, memorial practices evolve. Names are written down, photographs displayed, moments of silence observed. These acts of remembrance become essential. They prevent the dead from disappearing completely. They give grief a form, something that can be revisited rather than suppressed. At the same time, belief offers permission to hope cautiously. Hope is no longer grand or expansive. It is narrow and specific, that today will pass safely, that tomorrow will bring no telegram, that the night will remain quiet. These hopes are repeated daily, renewed each morning, fragile yet persistent. You come to understand that faith during war is not about optimism. It does not promise happy endings. It offers endurance. It allows people to carry fear without being crushed by it. It gives shape to waiting, to longing, to loss. Late at night, when the world grows still, belief feels closest. You lie awake listening to your own breathing, to the subtle sounds of the building settling. Thoughts drift toward those far away. You imagine them sleeping under different skies. You whisper words meant only for yourself, not expecting miracles, only continuity. In these moments, belief becomes almost indistinguishable from love. It is the act of holding someone in mind across distance and danger, of refusing to let them fade into abstraction, of insisting, quietly, that connection still exists. And so, day after day, faith, superstition, and silent prayer continue to weave themselves through life. They adapt, they falter, they recover, they remain. They do not end the war. They do not protect everyone. But they offer people something steady to lean on when nothing else feels reliable. And in this long, uncertain waiting, that steadiness becomes one of the few things that allows life to continue, gently, breath by breath, through the endless days of war. Waiting becomes an occupation of its own, one that requires patience, restraint, and a kind of quiet endurance you never knew you possessed. Each morning, almost without thinking, your attention drifts toward the same question. Has the post arrived yet? The thought appears gently, then settles in, refusing to leave. Letters have become lifelines now, thin envelopes carrying the weight of entire worlds inside them. You listen for footsteps outside, for the sound of a bicycle on stone, for the faint creak of a gate. These sounds sharpen your senses. Your body reacts before your mind does, heart lifting briefly, then steadying itself. You have learned not to hope too quickly. Hope, when disappointed too often, becomes exhausting. When letters arrive, they are handled with care that borders on reverence. You hold them for a moment before opening them, feeling the texture of the paper, recognizing handwriting instantly. Fingers trace the familiar curves of letters, confirming what the eyes already know. This small recognition brings comfort before a single word is read. You open envelopes slowly, as if pacing yourself. Ink smells faintly of distance. Words travel across continents and dangers to reach you. You read them carefully, sometimes aloud, sometimes silently, absorbing not only what is said, but what is left unsaid. Details about weather, about food, about health. Ordinary observations become precious because they suggest survival. You notice how letters are written with intention. Worries are softened, truth is filtered, pain is hinted at rather than described. Everyone understands this unspoken agreement. Letters are meant to reassure, not to burden. You read between the lines gently, without forcing meaning where it may not exist. After reading, you fold letters carefully and place them somewhere safe. They are reread often, sometimes daily. You memorize phrases, replaying them in your mind when silence grows heavy. In the absence of new information, old words sustain you. Not everyone receives letters. You see it in the way some people linger near mail deliveries without stepping forward. in the way their faces remain carefully neutral as others smile or sigh with relief. You learn not to ask questions. Absence of mail speaks loudly enough. Waiting fills the spaces between letters. It stretches endlessly, punctuated by routine. You return to work, to chores, to conversations, carrying the waiting with you. It hums quietly beneath everything, shaping mood and attention. You become skilled at distraction, at focusing on tasks to quiet the restless part of your mind. Evenings are often the hardest. The day's structure dissolves, leaving room for thought. You sit with hands idle, staring at familiar walls, listening to familiar sounds. Waiting becomes physical now, settling in the chest, tightening the throat. You remind yourself that no news is not necessarily bad news. You repeat this silently, like a prayer. And then there is the knock. You learn to fear it without ever saying so aloud. The sound of knuckles on wood carries a weight unlike any other. It arrives unexpectedly, cutting through routine, through conversation, through thought. Your body reacts instantly. Breath catches. Muscles tense. Time seems to slow. Not every knock brings tragedy. Sometimes it is a neighbour, a delivery, a routine visit. Relief washes through you quickly, followed by a trace of shame for having feared the worst. But the fear never fully disappears. It returns with the next knock, and the next. You know people for whom the knock brought finality. You've seen the aftermath, the stunned silence, the careful words, the way the world seems to tilt slightly off balance. These moments linger in collective memory, shaping everyone's response. They teach restraint. They teach caution. Because of this, people begin to anticipate the knock even in its absence. You imagine it when footsteps pass by your door. You flinch at unexpected sounds. You listen more closely than necessary. Vigilance becomes habit. Letters offer a fragile counterbalance to this fear. Each one that arrives safely pushes the knock a little farther away, at least for now. You cling to this logic even when you know it is imperfect. It helps you sleep. It helps you breathe. You notice how communities organize themselves around this shared waiting. News travels carefully. People support one another quietly. When someone receives bad news, meals appear without discussion. Visits are offered gently. Words are chosen with care. Grief is shared without spectacle. Children sense this atmosphere keenly. They learn the significance of letters quickly. They notice when adults grow tense around mail deliveries. They learn to stay quiet when envelopes are opened. Waiting becomes part of their understanding of the world, learned through observation rather than explanation. As days pass without news, imagination fills the gaps. You picture distant places you have never seen, trenches, camps, roads. You imagine the person you wait for moving through these spaces, waking, eating, resting, enduring. These imagined routines bring comfort, making distance feel smaller. And so waiting continues, day after day, letter after letter, or none at all. You learn to live within this uncertainty, balancing hope and fear carefully, like fragile objects that must not be dropped. This is how the war enters the heart. Not always through sudden loss, but through prolonged anticipation, through silence stretched thin, through listening for sounds that may or may not come. And as you settle into another evening, you find yourself doing what you have learned to do best. You wait. As the months pass, waiting no longer feels like an interruption to life. It becomes life itself. You begin to understand that waiting is not empty time, but something dense and heavy, filled with thoughts, memories, and imagined futures. It shapes your posture, your habits, even the way you breathe. You wake each morning already tired of waiting and yet ready to continue. It is a strange contradiction. The mind learns to hold anticipation at a low, constant level, like a fire kept burning just enough not to go out. Too much hope would consume you. Too little would leave you numb. So you learn balance, even if you never consciously decide to. The postman's route becomes familiar. You know roughly what time he passes, though it is never exact. You pretend not to watch the clock, yet you always know when the moment approaches. Sounds outside sharpen. Every footstep might be his. Every pause might mean he has stopped at your door. When the post arrives, the moment stretches. You see envelopes distributed down the street, hands reaching out, faces reacting in subtle ways. A smile quickly hidden, a sigh released only after the door closes, a stillness that lingers too long. These reactions are noted quietly, then respected. Everyone understands that letters are private, even though their absence or presence is visible to all. If you receive nothing, you do not comment. You fold the disappointment inward and continue with your day. You tell yourself the same phrases you have learned by heart. The mail is slow, routes are disrupted, delays are common. All of this may be true. It must be true because the alternative is too heavy to hold every day. If you do receive a letter, the relief is physical. Shoulders lower, breathing deepens. You feel lighter, if only briefly. Sometimes you delay opening it, savouring the certainty that it exists, the knowledge that someone, somewhere, was alive long enough to write it. You read letters repeatedly, not just for information but for tone. You analyse handwriting for signs of fatigue or haste. You notice whether sentences are shorter, whether words are carefully chosen. You search for clues without meaning to. Over time you become skilled at this silent interpretation. Letters are shared selectively. Some passages are read aloud to family members. Others are kept private, folded carefully and tucked away. You protect these words because they feel fragile, because they are the closest thing to presence you have. When letters stop for a while, the mind begins to wander more dangerously. You imagine reasons. You argue with yourself. You build stories, then dismantle them again. You remind yourself that silence does not mean disaster. You remind yourself again. Reassurance requires repetition. Waiting changes social behaviour. People become more attentive to one another's moods. You notice when someone grows quieter than usual, when they avoid eye contact, when they linger at the window too long. You offer company without questions, presence without pressure. This becomes an unspoken rule. The fear of the knock never fully disappears. It settles into the background like a low ache. Even when nothing happens, your body remains prepared. You jump slightly at sudden sounds. You rehearse what you might say, how you might stand, how you might respond, though you hope never to need those rehearsals. You learn that the knock does not always come immediately after bad news. Sometimes it arrives days later, sometimes weeks. This uncertainty makes vigilance endless. There is no point at which you can relax completely. Safety feels temporary, provisional, always subject to change. Nighttime magnifies everything. In the dark, sounds feel closer. Thoughts grow louder. You replay conversations, reread letters in your mind, reconstructing voices from memory. You imagine future letters, what they might say, how they might begin. This imagined correspondence becomes a companion to sleep. Dreams often revolve around waiting. You dream of missed deliveries, of unread letters, of endless corridors where messages are just out of reach. You wake unsettled, then remind yourself where you are. Another day, another wait. Children absorb this rhythm instinctively. They learn when not to interrupt. They learn that some days are good letter days, others are quiet days. They mirror adult behavior, becoming cautious, attentive, patient, beyond their years. Waiting becomes part of their understanding of love. In communities, rituals develop around bad news. When the knock does come for someone else, the response is immediate and collective. Neighbours arrive quietly. Food is prepared without being requested. Children are taken elsewhere. Words are chosen carefully or not at all. Grief is surrounded, not examined. You watch this happen, and fear deepens, but so does a strange sense of reassurance. You see that no one is left alone, that waiting, though lonely, is shared, that if the knock ever comes to your door, you will not face it in isolation. Over time, you begin to understand that letters do more than convey information. They anchor identity. They remind you who you are beyond the waiting. They preserve relationships against distance and danger. Without them, the world feels thinner, less real. And yet, you also learn to survive without them. You continue to cook, to work, to care for others. You perform normal actions in an abnormal context. This endurance becomes its own achievement, though no one names it as such. As another day ends, you prepare for night once more. You place letters carefully where you can reach them. You listen to the building settle. You breathe slowly, deliberately. Waiting stretches on unbroken, and still you remain. You listen. You hope carefully. You fear quietly. This is how love survives war, not loudly, not heroically, but patiently through ink, paper, silence, and the steady courage of waiting for another day to pass without the knock. Illness and death are no longer rare interruptions to life. They have become constant companions, moving quietly through streets, homes, hospitals, and minds. They do not always arrive suddenly. Often they come slowly, announced first by fatigue, by coughing, by a lingering weakness that refuses to leave. You notice how bodies seem more fragile now. Nutrition is poorer, rest is scarce, work is relentless. These conditions wear people down gradually, making even minor ailments more dangerous. A cold lingers. An infection worsens. Recovery takes longer, if it comes at all. You learn to pay attention to small signs, because small signs can mean everything. Hospitals feel different than they once did. You enter them and are met by a dense mixture of smells: disinfectant, sweat, metal, damp fabric. Corridors are crowded. Beds are placed close together, sometimes too close. Privacy is scarce. Curtains are drawn, then opened again, endlessly. You hear coughing, murmured prayers, quiet instructions spoken quickly. Nurses and doctors move with practiced urgency. Their faces are calm, but their eyes carry exhaustion. You see it in the way they stand, in the careful economy of their movements. They do not linger. They cannot afford to. There are always more patients waiting, more wounds to clean, more fevers to monitor. Wounds from the front arrive regularly. Some are visible immediately: bandaged limbs, missing pieces of uniform, faces drawn tight with pain. Others are less obvious: trembling hands, distant stares, sudden silences. You sense that not all injuries bleed, and that some may never fully heal. You watch as men return changed, even when their bodies appear whole. Their movements are cautious. their reactions delayed or exaggerated. Loud sounds startle them, crowds make them uneasy. They carry the war inside them, quietly, persistently. You do not ask questions, you allow silence to do its work. Illness spreads easily in crowded conditions. Influenza, pneumonia, infections pass through neighbourhoods without regard for age or strength. You hear of families falling ill together, of beds filled in every room. Care is given where possible, but resources are limited. Medicines are scarce. Knowledge has its limits. At home, caregiving becomes a central task. You learn how to tend fevered bodies, how to cool foreheads, how to listen to breathing through the night. You count breaths unconsciously. You learn the sound of restlessness, of pain, of relief. Sleep comes in fragments, interrupted by checking, adjusting, worrying. Death no longer feels abstract. It enters rooms quietly, sometimes unexpectedly, sometimes after long vigil. You learn its signs, the slowing breath, the stillness that follows, the silence that feels heavier than sound. When it comes, there is often no drama, just a pause, a recognition, a shift. Funeral rituals grow familiar, black clothing appears more often, bells toll more frequently, processions move slowly through streets, drawing quiet attention. You stand among others, heads bowed, hands clasped. Words are spoken that you have heard many times before, yet they never lose their weight. Children learn about death early now. They sense its presence in hushed conversations, in closed doors, in the way adults move differently after certain visits. Explanations are gentle, sometimes incomplete. Children accept more than adults expect, though they carry questions they may not voice. You notice how people speak of death indirectly. Euphemisms multiply. Phrases soften reality. This distance offers protection, allowing life to continue without constant confrontation. Yet the awareness remains, always nearby, shaping behaviour and expectation. Grief becomes something carried quietly. Public displays are restrained. Tears are shed in private. People learn to function despite loss, because stopping would mean being overwhelmed. You see strength in this restraint, though you know it comes at a cost. The presence of death changes priorities. Small conflicts lose importance. Petty concerns fade. Attention shifts to essentials, care, comfort, presence. People become gentler with one another, more patient, more forgiving. Mortality sharpens empathy. At night, thoughts of illness and death surface more easily. You lie awake replaying moments, conversations, signs you may have missed. Guilt creeps in quietly. Could you have done more? Said more? Known more? These questions rarely find answers, yet alongside fear, there is tenderness. You notice how people touch one another more gently now, how voices soften, how time is given freely to the sick, to the grieving. Care becomes an expression of love when words feel insufficient. As days continue, you learn that living with death does not mean becoming numb. It means learning how to hold sorrow without letting it consume everything else. It means acknowledging fragility while continuing to act, to care, to endure. Illness and death are now part of the landscape of daily life. They walk beside you quietly, shaping choices, deepening awareness, reminding you of what is precious. And still, each morning you rise, you breathe, you continue. Because even in the presence of death, life insists on being lived. As time goes on, you realize that living alongside illness and death does not mean becoming accustomed to them in any simple way. Instead, you develop a kind of careful awareness, a constant attentiveness that settles deep within you. You learn how to move gently through days shaped by uncertainty, knowing that bodies are fragile and that life can shift suddenly without warning. You notice how conversations change when illness enters a home, voices lower, movements slow. Ordinary routines are altered without discussion. Chairs are pulled closer to beds. Windows are opened or closed with great care. Water is warmed. Cloths are folded. The home reorganizes itself around the needs of the sick as if guided by instinct rather than instruction. Caregiving becomes an intimate, demanding presence in daily life. You learn how to recognize the difference between restless sleep and dangerous agitation. You learn how to listen not only to words, but to breathing, to silence, to subtle changes in posture. You sit for hours, sometimes doing nothing more than being present, understanding that presence itself can be a form of care. Medical knowledge feels both precious and insufficient. You trust doctors and nurses deeply, yet you sense their limitations. Treatments help, but they do not always cure. You see professionals making difficult decisions quickly, guided by experience and necessity rather than certainty. Their calm steadiness offers reassurance, even when outcomes remain unclear. Hospitals remain crowded, their atmosphere heavy with effort and emotion. You notice how patients wait, some quietly hopeful, others withdrawn, others fearful. You see people comfort strangers, offering small kindnesses without knowing names. Shared vulnerability creates temporary bonds, brief but sincere. Wounds from the front continue to arrive, bringing the war physically into civilian spaces. You see bandages stained through. You hear groans suppressed by pride. You notice how pain is endured silently, because complaining feels pointless when so many suffer. Yet beneath this restraint, fear persists. Fear of permanent injury, of dependence, of becoming a burden. You begin to understand that some wounds do not heal visibly. You see men who struggle to sleep, who startle at sudden sounds, who withdraw from conversation. Their suffering is quiet, often misunderstood. There are no clear remedies for this kind of injury. Compassion becomes the only treatment available. Death, when it comes, is rarely dramatic. Often it arrives in the early hours, quietly, while others sleep. You wake to a change in atmosphere, to a stillness that feels different from rest. Words are exchanged softly. Practical steps follow. Sheets are adjusted. Windows opened. Time pauses briefly, then resumes. Funerals become deeply familiar, yet never routine. Each one carries its own weight, its own sorrow. You stand among others, feeling the collective gravity of loss. Faces blur together. Words spoken over graves or coffins echo those heard many times before. Yet they never lose their power. Each repetition reinforces the reality of mortality. Children attend these rituals with solemn curiosity. They watch adults closely, learning how grief is expressed and contained. They ask questions later, quietly, at unexpected moments. Answers are offered gently, often incomplete. Understanding unfolds slowly, shaped by observation rather than explanation. Grief stretches over time rather than peaking sharply. You see it surface unexpectedly, in a familiar object, a remembered phrase, an empty place at the table. People carry it quietly, allowing it to appear and recede as it must. There is little space for prolonged mourning, yet mourning never truly ends. The presence of death alters how you perceive time. Moments feel more valuable. Ordinary interactions gain significance. You notice how people linger longer during goodbyes, how hands are held a bit tighter, how words of affection are spoken more openly. Awareness of loss sharpens appreciation. At the same time, fear grows quieter but more constant. You become aware of your own body in new ways. Every ache, every cough draws attention. You monitor yourself carefully, balancing concern with practicality. Panic serves no purpose. Vigilance does. Night remains the most difficult. Illness and death feel closer in the dark. Thoughts wander, memories replay. You imagine alternative outcomes, different choices. Sleep arrives reluctantly, often shallow and interrupted. Yet even broken rest is better than none, and you learn to accept it. Despite all of this, life continues. Children grow, work resumes, meals are prepared, conversations happen. Laughter returns occasionally, unexpected and startling. These moments feel almost guilty at first, then necessary. They remind you that life persists even in the shadow of mortality. You realize that living with death does not mean surrendering to it. It means acknowledging its presence while choosing to continue caring, working, loving. It means holding sorrow alongside routine, fear alongside function. Illness and death shape the landscape of wartime life, but they do not erase humanity. Instead, they reveal it, in patience, in tenderness, in the quiet courage of those who sit through long nights, who show up day after day, who continue to care even when outcomes are uncertain. And so, you move forward once more, with caution, with compassion, with an awareness that every ordinary day is, in itself, something fragile and precious. In a world where loss has become familiar, the act of continuing to live gently becomes one of the most profound forms of resilience. Joy does not disappear entirely. It changes shape. It becomes quieter, smaller, more deliberate. No longer something taken for granted. It arrives in brief moments, often unexpected, and lingers only if you hold it gently. These small joys do not erase hardship, but they soften its edges, allowing you to breathe more freely, if only for a while. You begin to notice how people seek relief instinctively, not through grand celebrations, but through simple pleasures woven into ordinary days. A cup of tea prepared carefully, a window opened to let in fresh air, a shared glance that carries warmth without words. These moments feel precious precisely because they are fragile. Music becomes one of the most powerful escapes. You hear it drifting from open windows in the evening, played softly so as not to disturb. A piano touched gently, a violin murmuring familiar melodies, someone humming while working, barely aware they are doing it. Music fills spaces that words cannot reach, carrying emotion without demanding explanation. When people gather, even briefly, songs emerge naturally. Familiar tunes are chosen, ones everyone knows by heart. Voices blend imperfectly, sometimes hesitantly at first, then more confidently. Singing steadies breathing. It synchronizes hearts. For a few minutes, fear loosens its grip, replaced by something lighter. You notice how music transforms rooms. Shoulders relax, faces soften. Even those who rarely speak find themselves joining in, quietly at first, then more fully. The act of singing together creates a sense of belonging that feels especially important now. It reminds you that you're not alone, that others carry the same weight. Beyond music, small entertainments survive. People gather around radios when available, listening intently to news, to stories, to voices from elsewhere. The radio becomes a window beyond the immediate world, offering distraction, connection, and a reminder that life exists beyond local streets and routines. In quieter homes, reading offers escape. Books are reread countless times. Pages soften. Margins fill with notes. Stories provide temporary refuge, transporting minds to different places, different times. You notice how people linger over descriptions, savouring imagined abundance, imagined peace. Children invent joy with remarkable persistence. Despite restrictions and fears, they find ways to play. They chase each other through narrow streets, laugh suddenly and loudly, then quiet themselves again. Their laughter feels almost shocking at times, a reminder of what the world once sounded like. You see how adults respond to this laughter, with surprise, with relief, sometimes with tears. It reassures them that something essential remains intact. That innocence, though altered, has not been entirely lost. Festivals and holidays still arrive, though they are subdued. Decorations are modest. Meals are simpler, yet effort is made. Candles are lit. Tables are set carefully. These acts are deliberate, a quiet defiance against despair. Marking time matters. It reminds everyone that life continues to move forward. You notice how people dress a little more carefully on these occasions, even if clothing is worn, a clean collar, a mended sleeve. These details signal intention, respect for the moment. They say, this still matters. Conversations during these gatherings avoid heavy topics at first. People speak of weather, of work, of small observations. Gradually laughter emerges, tentative but real. For a short while the war recedes slightly, pushed to the edges of awareness. Nature offers its own escapes. You walk outside and notice how seasons continue regardless of conflict. Trees bud, leaves fall, birds sing. These cycles feel grounding, reassuring. They remind you that the world is larger than human struggle, that continuity exists beyond immediate suffering. You pause to feel sunlight when it appears, warming your face briefly. You notice the smell of rain, the texture of soil underfoot. These sensory experiences anchor you in the present, pulling attention away from worry. Small acts of kindness bring unexpected joy. A neighbour sharing a rare treat, a child offering a drawing, a stranger holding a door. These gestures feel magnified now, carrying more meaning than they would have before. They remind you of shared humanity. Even humour survives, though it is gentler now. Jokes are quieter, often self-deprecating, careful not to wound. Laughter erupts suddenly, surprising those who hear it. It releases tension that has been held too long. You begin to understand that these fleeting escapes are not distractions from reality. They are tools for survival. They allow people to rest emotionally, to gather strength, to continue. As evening settles, you reflect on these moments. They do not change the larger situation. They do not end waiting, hunger, fear. But they offer balance. They remind you why endurance matters. In the midst of war, joy becomes intentional, chosen, protected. And you learn to recognize it when it appears, quietly, briefly, and to welcome it without guilt, knowing that these small lights are what make the darkness bearable. These small joys are not accidental. They are cultivated carefully, protected deliberately, because everyone senses how necessary they are. In a world shaped by loss and uncertainty, moments of light must be created, almost crafted by hand. the way one might tend a fragile flame in a drafty room. You notice how people plan these moments quietly. A neighbour mentions a song remembered from before the war. Someone suggests gathering for a short evening, just an hour, nothing elaborate. Invitations are modest, expectations kept low. No one wants to tempt disappointment. Yet when the moment arrives, there is gratitude simply for having something to anticipate. Music again becomes the centre. You sit in a small room, chairs drawn close, coats left on. Someone begins to play, fingers hesitant at first, then more confident as the melody unfolds. The sound is imperfect. Notes are missed. Timing slips. And yet the effect is profound. The music fills the space between people, smoothing rough edges, lifting spirits without demanding explanation. You feel how bodies respond almost automatically. Shoulders lower, breathing slows. Some close their eyes. Others watch hands move across keys or strings, mesmerized by the simple fact of creation. For a short while, attention rests fully in the present, no longer pulled relentlessly toward worry. When singing begins, it does so gently. Familiar words rise from memory without effort. Voices blend unevenly, but no one minds. The act itself matters more than the result. Singing together reminds you of shared history, of evenings long past when songs were sung without fear, without restraint. That memory alone carries comfort. Afterward, silence settles differently than before. It feels fuller, warmer. People linger, reluctant to break the spell. Conversations resume slowly, carefully, as if not to disturb what has just passed. When laughter comes, it feels earned, released after long restraint. Outside of these gatherings, joy appears in smaller, quieter ways. You notice it when someone takes extra care preparing a meal, even with limited ingredients. A table set thoughtfully, a flower placed in a jar. These details signal intention. They say, this moment is worth attention. You observe how people save certain pleasures for specific times. A piece of chocolate tucked away for weeks. A favourite book read only in the evening. A walk taken at the same hour each day. These small rituals create anticipation, breaking the monotony of waiting. Children continue to find joy with remarkable resilience. They create games from scraps, invent stories, laugh loudly and without warning. Their ability to inhabit the present fully becomes something adults watch with quiet admiration. Sometimes adults allow themselves to join in, if only briefly, borrowing that lightness before returning to responsibility. You notice how adults respond to these moments afterward. There is a softness in their expressions, a renewed patience. Joy, even fleeting, replenishes something essential. It does not erase fatigue, but it makes it more bearable. Seasonal changes bring their own small pleasures. The first warmth of spring after a long winter. The sound of leaves underfoot in autumn. Snow falling quietly at night. These natural rhythms offer reassurance. They remind you that time continues to move, that change remains possible. You learn to savour sensory details more deeply. The texture of wool against skin, the smell of soap, the taste of warm bread, however small the portion. These sensations ground you in the present, offering comfort that is immediate and real. There are moments when joy feels almost inappropriate, when guilt flickers unexpectedly. How can one laugh when so many suffer? You notice this hesitation in yourself and others, but gradually understanding grows. Joy does not betray those who are absent. It honours them. It affirms that life continues, that what they fought for still exists in small human moments. You see this understanding reflected in how communities respond to joy. There is acceptance, even encouragement. No one scolds laughter. No one shames celebration, however modest. Everyone recognizes that endurance requires relief. As night falls, these moments linger in memory. You replay them quietly, letting them settle before sleep. They soften dreams, replacing some of the day's tension with warmth. You wake the next morning carrying that residue of light, however faint. Over time, you come to see these fleeting escapes not as distractions, but as sustenance. They feed the spirit in ways food alone cannot. They provide balance in a life weighted heavily toward worry and loss. In the midst of war, joy becomes deliberate. It is chosen, protected, shared. It appears in music, in laughter, in kindness, in nature, in routine. It arrives briefly, then moves on, leaving behind a trace of strength. And you learn to welcome it when it comes, to hold it gently, to let it pass without clinging. Because these small joys are not meant to last forever. They are meant to help you continue. And in this long, uncertain time, continuing, with warmth still possible, with humanity intact, becomes one of the quiet triumphs of everyday life in war. The war stretches on, and you feel how time presses differently upon the body and the mind. Aging, which once felt gradual and almost invisible, now becomes something you can sense day by day. The years seem heavier, denser, as if each one contains more weight than before. You feel older than your age suggests, not only in your bones but in your thoughts, your silences, your pauses. You notice it first in the faces around you. Lines appear more quickly now, etched by worry rather than laughter. Hair turns grey sooner. Backs bend a little more. Eyes grow deeper, carrying reflections of things seen and things endured. People speak of age differently, no longer counting years, but experiences. Before the war, since the war began, since that winter, since that loss. Older people move more slowly through this changed world, yet they carry a particular steadiness. Many of them have lived through earlier hardships, other moments of uncertainty. You sense that they recognize something familiar in this prolonged strain. They do not speak of it often, but their presence offers quiet reassurance. They know that endurance is possible, even when the end cannot be seen. At the same time, you notice how the war accelerates aging in the young. Those who were once carefree now move with seriousness. Their expressions harden, then soften again, shaped by responsibility. Childhood fades early. Youth shortens. People grow into roles faster than they should, learning restraint, patience and grief long before they're ready. Memory begins to occupy more space in daily life. People talk about the past more often now, not out of nostalgia alone, but because memory offers contrast. It reminds them that the present is not all that has ever existed. Stories are told repeatedly, of ordinary days, simple routines, small joys from before everything changed. These stories grow smoother with repetition, polished by retelling. You listen to these memories carefully. They are not grand. They rarely involve heroes or triumphs. They focus on meals shared, streets walked, voices heard. These details matter because they anchor identity. They remind people who they were before the war began to reshape them. You notice how memory becomes selective. Painful moments are revisited cautiously, if at all. Losses acknowledged, but not always explored. People learn which memories can be carried safely and which must remain buried. at least for now. Survival depends on this quiet curation. In homes, objects become vessels of memory. A chair worn smooth by use, a photograph faded at the edges, a book read many times over. You see people touching these objects absent-mindedly, grounding themselves in something solid and familiar. These items connect past and present, offering continuity when everything else feels unstable. Aging also brings a heightened awareness of the body's limits. You feel it in stiffness upon waking, in fatigue that settles earlier in the evening, in recovery that takes longer than it once did. Illness leaves deeper marks, injuries linger. You adjust your pace accordingly, learning when to push and when to rest. Yet there is also a quiet wisdom that grows alongside this weariness. You become more patient, more observant, less inclined toward urgency when it serves no purpose. You learn that not everything must be spoken, not everything must be resolved immediately. Some things can be carried quietly. The war shapes how people imagine the future, especially as they age. Plans become modest. Expectations narrow. People speak less about distant dreams and more about immediate hopes. That the coming winter will be manageable. That health will hold. That loved ones will remain safe for another day. At the same time, there is an undercurrent of longing, not always for the war to end, but for normality to return. Older people speak of wanting to see familiar routines restored before they're gone. Younger ones speak of wanting a future unmarked by constant fear. These desires coexist, woven together by shared waiting. You notice how people begin to measure their lives differently. Achievements matter less than relationships. Success is redefined as survival, as care given and received. Being present becomes more important than being productive. These shifts happen quietly, without announcement. As years pass, memory and aging intertwine. The war becomes a reference point for everything else. People mark events in relation to it. Births, deaths, marriages, illnesses, all are framed by the larger context of conflict. The war infiltrates personal timelines, becoming inseparable from individual stories. Even on days when nothing extraordinary happens, you feel its presence. It lingers in the way people pause before speaking, in the way they listen more closely, in the way they hold one another just a little longer. It shapes how people grow older, how they remember, how they endure. And as you move through these days, you realize that aging during war is not simply about decline. It is about accumulation of memory, of experience, of resilience. It is about becoming someone shaped deeply by circumstance, carrying forward lessons learned slowly, painfully, patiently. The war does not pass through people unchanged. It settles into them. It becomes part of who they are, and as time continues to move forward, you understand that this shaping will last far beyond the final days of conflict, carried quietly by those who lived through it, into whatever future waits beyond. Time continues to unfold. You begin to sense that the war does not exist only in the present moment. It stretches backward and forward, weaving itself into memory and expectation alike. Even as days pass quietly, even as routines stabilize, the war remains present. Not always loudly, but persistently, like a deep echo that never fully fades. You notice how memory changes with age in this wartime world. Events do not line up neatly anymore. Some days from years ago feel closer than yesterday. Other moments disappear entirely, lost to fatigue or pain. Memory becomes selective, not because people choose what to remember, but because the mind protects itself, holding on to what it can bear. Older people often sit quietly, hands folded, eyes distant. When they speak, it is not always about the war directly, but the war shapes everything they say. A comment about weather leads to a memory of a winter long past. A mention of bread recalls years of scarcity. Even joy is filtered through comparison. Better than those years, they might say softly, or not as bad as before. You realize that for many, the war has divided life into clear sections: before, during, and the uncertain space after, which remains undefined. Even as the conflict nears its end, or at least changes form, people hesitate to imagine what comes next. The war has trained them to expect interruption, to distrust permanence. Aging during these years brings a heightened awareness of finitude. You feel it in how people speak of time remaining rather than time ahead. Birthdays are marked quietly, anniversaries acknowledged with a nod rather than celebration. Each passing year feels significant, not because of age alone, but because survival itself feels like an achievement. You notice how elders observe the young with a mixture of tenderness and concern. They see in them both hope and vulnerability. They wonder how deeply the war will mark them, what habits of fear or restraint will remain long after peace returns. They worry quietly, knowing they may not be there to guide them through what comes next. At the same time, older generations feel a responsibility to remember, to carry stories forward, to ensure that what was endured is not erased or simplified. You hear them repeat certain accounts deliberately, carefully, as if setting something down for safekeeping. Memory becomes a form of duty. These stories are not always about suffering. Often they focus on resilience, on how people helped one another, on how life continued despite everything. These narratives offer meaning, shaping how the war will be remembered by those who did not live through it fully. You begin to understand that memory itself becomes a kind of shelter. When the present feels uncertain and the future feels unreachable, memory offers structure. It provides a sense of continuity, reminding people that they have endured before, that change has happened, even if slowly. The body, however, carries its own memories. You feel it in stiffness that never fully disappears, in scars that ache during cold weather, in fatigue that arrives earlier each evening. These physical reminders require no reflection. They simply exist, shaping how you move through the world. You learn to listen to your body more carefully, to rest when possible, to accept limitations without frustration. Aging during war teaches patience in a way few other experiences can. It teaches you to measure strength not by speed or endurance, but by persistence. As the war's end begins to feel imaginable, though not yet certain, people approach the idea cautiously. Peace is no longer an abstract good. It is something fragile, almost intimidating. What will life be without constant vigilance, without rationing, waiting, listening? The thought is both comforting and unsettling. You sense that for many, the war will never truly end. Even when fighting stops, its patterns will remain. People will still listen for sounds that no longer matter. They will still hoard habits of scarcity. They will still wake early, expect interruption, prepare for loss even when none comes. Memory ensures that the war becomes part of identity. Not something endured and left behind, but something integrated. It shapes values, priorities, relationships. It teaches people what matters when everything else is stripped away. In quiet moments, you reflect on what you've carried through these years, the fears that once felt overwhelming, the routines that kept you grounded, the small joys that sustained you. You realize that you are not the same person who began this journey. You are shaped by what you have seen, felt, and survived, and yet you are still here. Aging during war does not mean being diminished alone. It means being layered, with memory, with resilience, with understanding earned slowly and painfully. It means carrying forward not only wounds, but knowledge. As days draw on, you accept that the war will always live somewhere inside you. Not always sharply, not always painfully, sometimes quietly as background, sometimes rising unexpectedly, triggered by a sound, a smell, a word. But you also know this: life has continued despite it. People have aged, children have grown, love has endured, meaning has been found in unlikely places. And so, as this chapter of life settles into memory, you understand that survival is not simply about outlasting danger. It is about carrying experience forward without letting it erase humanity. The war never fully leaves, but neither does the strength learned in living through it. And as you move toward rest, toward the quiet of night, you carry that understanding gently with you, a testament to endurance, memory, and the slow, patient passage of time. Now slowly you begin to leave this world behind. You have walked through ordinary days shaped by extraordinary circumstances. You have woken in cold rooms where absence lingered. You have waited in long queues, held ration cards carefully, listened for footsteps that might bring relief or fear. You have worked until your body learned new limits. You have prayed in silence, hoped cautiously, and learned how to live with uncertainty without letting it consume you. You have seen how children grew too quickly, how adults carried responsibilities they never expected, how the elderly held memory like a fragile flame. You have felt hunger, not always sharp, but constant. You have known the weight of waiting, the power of letters, the terror of the knock that might change everything. You have stood close to illness and death, learning tenderness where control was impossible. And yet you have also noticed something else. You have noticed music drifting through open windows, laughter appearing suddenly, almost shyly, small rituals that gave shape to days, moments of warmth that arrived briefly, then passed on, leaving behind just enough strength to continue. You have seen how joy survived, not loudly, not triumphantly, but quietly, patiently, through human connection. This was daily life during the First World War. Not only a story of battles and dates, but a story of endurance, of ordinary people learning day after day how to live inside uncertainty. As you return now to the present, notice how your own surroundings feel. The quiet of your room, the safety of the night, the distance between you and that world you have just visited. Let that awareness settle gently, without judgment. And you may ask yourself softly, without needing an answer tonight, would you have survived in this world? Would you have endured its long waiting, its scarcity, its quiet fears? Would you have found those small joys, those fleeting escapes, those reasons to continue? Thank you for travelling through history with me tonight. Thank you for sharing these quiet hours, these remembered lives. If this journey comforted you, helped you relax, or carried you gently towards sleep, consider subscribing so you can return for many more nights of history. And if you wish, leave a small comment telling where you're listening from tonight before you close your eyes. Now let your breathing slow, let the past fade gently. Let the night take over. Sleep well.